American national government. This is Dr. Patrick Stewart. Chapter 7, Political Parties. In this segment, we'll be considering the learning objective of enumerating what political parties do in the U.S. political system. So, the question is, what do political parties do? Well, they do multiple things, but there are four important functions that they play. First, they nominate candidates for election to public office. Here, they assure that there are minimum qualifications for the candidates through a peer review process. In other words, they check out the candidates before they allow the candidates to put their name of the political party behind them when they can. Secondly, they structure the voting choice in elections. Now, what this does is this reduces the number of candidates on the ballot, which is very important in the primary elections where if you have too much choice, you might go with the easy choice, which might not necessarily be the wisest choice. Third, they propose alternative government programs. Here they help voters choose between policies as well as personalities. And ultimately, when we consider that political parties are about policies and the people who carry them out, this is very important, as is the fourth factor, which is coordinating the actions of government officials. And this provides a bridge for the separation of powers. So while we do have the separation of powers, and this is a very important part of our political system, there is a need for the different officials within certainly the executive and the legislative branches, and to a much lesser extent the judicial branches, to be able to coordinate effectively to deal with different policies. So let's look at how they facilitate participation. Now, the political parties facilitate participation because they aggregate interests and act as intermediaries between citizens and here parties aggregate multiple and often conflicting demands into much broader, more coherent messages. And this makes sense because if you're trying to bring together large groups of people, there's oftentimes going to be conflict over what exactly is the best path. And so political parties will work as intermediaries between the citizens by bringing these party platform interests together in such a manner that is at least acceptable for those within the political party. These political parties also facilitate participation by simplifying alternatives for voters. And as discussed briefly in the last slide, we see that this reduction of the amount of information is necessary to decide which candidate is the best choice. Now, while humans are certainly very intelligent, when it comes to politics and when it comes to anything, having too much choice can oftentimes lead to simple decision heuristics which might be quite bad. And also, the parties make it easier to keep up with the issues and positions of the candidates by limiting them. So if you see two candidates in the general election, if you look beside their name and see Republican or Democrat, you at least have a general idea of what these parties stand for, and as a result, which candidate you should vote for based upon where they likely stand. So if we're looking at partisans in the electorate, we see that here in figure 7.3 from the book, that's remained relatively stable. Well, certainly there was a dip in the 1960s through the 1980s and into the 2000s. After the turn of the millennia, there was a tick upward, so it's now pretty much along the lines of the 1950s as far as partisanship. How this breaks down is we see that when you look at independents, people who claim themselves independent and leaning for a political party, the Democrats and Republicans are between 30 to 40% of the electorate, I should say. But when you break it down even further, you see that the independents, those who consider themselves true independents, are only around 10%, whereas those who consider themselves Republicans or Democrats ranges between 40 to 50%. So certainly identifying with the political parties acts as a really useful decision tool or heuristic to be able to make electoral decisions. So The political parties certainly facilitate participation through their campaign activities, and this stimulates interest in politics and the government. And so what we do is we see the parties contest and they mobilized the voters. And they also fund the campaigns. They engage in media campaigns that gets the vote out to the people, or the candidates out to the people. And then they help get the vote into the polls by getting supporters registered into the polls on election day. In other words, those GOTV, or Get Out the Vote campaigns. They likewise promote government responsiveness. So the political parties, by serving as a basis for organizing and operating the national government, they provide a means by which government can be held responsible. In other words, the voting choices determine which party wins control of the institutions of government, and as a result, there is the expectation that the party that wins will actually put their policies in action. And it also promotes government accountability. Here, the minority party plays an important role by keeping an eye on the majority party. So what we see here is that by being out of power, you want to check the power of the majority. And it also aids citizens by holding the unresponsive policymakers accountable when you're in the minority party, saying that, look, they're not doing what they said they would, or they're doing what they said they would, but they're doing it poorly. Now, one of the things that's not as well studied, but still is highly important, is the role that political parties play in promoting stability and peaceful resolution of conflict. Politics is about conflict, but this conflict can escalate into violence. And so the political parties provide a peaceful means in which the pursuit and maintenance and the turnover of political power occurs. And it's this peaceful transfer of power. In other words, candidates playing the role of good loser and the parties being behind them, that is so very important for the functioning of a political system and everything that goes on within that political system, regardless of what it is. So this is referred to as the responsible party model. Here, it describes democracy with strong competitive parties in which one party wins control of the government based upon its policy proposals, while encouraging government to be responsive to the will of the people. The party in power enacts the proposals once elected in the responsible party model, and it stands or falls in the next election based upon its performance in delivering on its promises. Now, this isn't necessarily just on whether they deliver their promises, but also whether their promises lead to good policy that assists those voters. Now, the party out of power, in other words, the loyal opposition, notes every policy failure and action at odds with the popular sentiment, and formulate new policies and provide points of contrast and debate for the next election. In other words, the party out of power is oftentimes one that uses the media and plays the role of watchdog, barking an awful lot. Now, the thing is this responsible party model in which you have the party in power and party out of power playing very important roles is a bit idealized. And this is the lack of party discipline basically means that we have representatives that don't necessarily promote and carry out the policy agenda of the political parties. So the ability to hold the parties responsible is not as viable as we might like to think. American national government.